Sign the papers, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the church organ, and I felt a familiar chill crawl up my spine. I looked at her calmly, a gentle smile resting on my lips, and simply nodded, keeping my hands folded in front of me as the minister spoke about the life my late husband had lived. The room smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood, and the soft sunlight streamed through the stained glass, casting colorful patterns across the pews where family members sat, some staring at me with curiosity, some avoiding my gaze entirely. I could hear James shuffling in his seat, trying to make himself small, and I noticed how Emily's eyes darted around, searching for approval, as if I might be the last barrier between her and what she wanted. I did not react immediately. I did not scowl. I did not speak. I simply allowed the moment to stretch, observing the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers clenched slightly, and the almost imperceptible tightening around James' jaw. As the service continued, I thought about the past weeks leading up to this day, the careful arrangements I had made to honor my husband, the freshly polished silverware, the wreath I had placed on the casket, the meticulous notes I had written to guide the eulogies. Everything was done with respect, with love, with a quiet dignity that had been my way of showing devotion all these years. And yet here, in this sacred space, the air was thick with betrayal, the kind that is silent but cuts deeper than any shouted accusation. I remembered the moments over the past few months when Emily had subtly inserted herself into decisions about my husband's estate, the way James had begun avoiding me, claiming busier schedules at work, the small rearrangements of furniture, the quiet decisions made without a word to me, each one a thread in a tapestry that now revealed its pattern. My mind did not race, my heart did not pound. Instead, I felt a clear, measured awareness, a recognition that everything happening before me was deliberate, and yet, I held myself with a serenity that was both armor and statement. The ceremony drew on, hymns echoing through the high ceilings, the gentle murmur of the organ punctuating the quiet grief of those around me. I noticed the subtle gestures. A hand brushed a pew cushion slightly too far from me, a nod that bypassed my presence, whispers that seemed to pause when I looked their way. Each tiny act was a note in the symphony of intent, and I cataloged them with the precision of someone accustomed to reading the silent language of human behavior. When the service concluded and the minister stepped down from the pulpit, I rose slowly, feeling the weight of my age and my loss, yet moving with deliberate purpose. I walked past the rows, my smile unwavering, and reached for my purse, taking out my phone and dialing Mr. Carter, my lawyer, with a composure that belied the storm of awareness simmering beneath. Emily's lips parted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, as if she had expected me to crumble or to confront her with anger, but I remained still, my expression calm and unyielding. James followed closely, uncertainty etched in his features, his usual confidence faltering as he realized the reaction he anticipated would not come. I stepped into the foyer, the polished marble cool beneath my feet, and spoke quietly into the phone, giving Mr. Carter the necessary instructions while keeping my tone measured, the casualness a mask for the careful strategy forming in my mind. As I ended the call, I glanced back at Emily and James, noting their shifting posture, the subtle tension in the air, and I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction in having held my ground, in having made the first move without drawing attention to my awareness. I allowed myself a brief inhale, the scent of polished wood and lilies filling my lungs, and walked outside to the sun-drenched steps of the church, feeling the warmth of the day contrast sharply with the cold calculations that had transpired indoors. I looked at the sky, clear and bright, and considered the days ahead, the careful measures I would take to protect what was rightfully mine, the subtle maneuvers that would reveal the truth without spectacle, and I smiled again, not with joy, but with a steady, unwavering clarity that signaled to anyone watching that the story was far from over and that the quiet power of a patient mind could be more formidable than any raised voice. The morning after the funeral, I found myself alone in the quiet of my home, the kind of silence that fills every corner with a weight heavier than any conversation. The sun had risen fully, spilling light across the polished oak floors, illuminating the meticulous arrangements I had made for the day, now untouched and still. I poured myself a cup of tea, watching the steam curl upward, and listened to the distant hum of traffic outside, a reminder that life went on even as my world felt momentarily suspended. Emily had gone home, her absence a temporary relief, yet I knew the quiet would not last. The undercurrents of her intentions lingered in every unopened letter, every misplaced envelope that I had discovered over the past weeks. I moved through the rooms with careful steps, noting the subtle disarray that suggested someone had been there in a hurry, rearranging or inspecting, perhaps hoping I would not notice. In the study, I gathered the papers I had set aside, reviewing the contents with deliberate calm, my fingers tracing the edges as if absorbing the weight of decisions made behind my back. Each document told a story of planning and oversight, yet none held the power they might have if I allowed panic to guide my actions. I took a deep breath, recalling the conversations I had shared with my husband in the years before his passing, the promises of trust and security, and the quiet understanding that we had built a life together, one that deserved careful stewardship. The living room still bore the marks of recent gatherings, a half-empty vase of lilies, the remnants of refreshments for visitors who had offered condolences but remained distant in their attention. I straightened the cushions and arranged the family photographs on the mantel, not out of vanity, but as an assertion of continuity, a reminder that despite recent revelations, the threads of my life remained intact. I settled into the armchair by the window, watching as a light breeze shifted the branches of the maple tree outside, the leaves catching sunlight in a gentle dance. My mind moved through the events that had led to this moment, reconstructing conversations, gestures, and glances, noting patterns that had previously escaped notice. James had been increasingly withdrawn, his questions guarded, his presence less frequent, yet each encounter was meticulously analyzed, cataloged, and stored for reference. Emily's calculated interactions were now transparent, the small requests, the seemingly innocent suggestions, each aligned into a coherent design that revealed ambition over affection. I made no sound, spoke no word of accusation, and yet my awareness was sharp, every nuance of their behavior recorded in the quiet observation that I had honed over a lifetime. As the clock ticked steadily in the background, I allowed myself a measure of reflection, thinking about the strategies I would employ not in haste but with patience, each action measured, precise, and deliberate. The calm was essential. It was not weakness but a demonstration of understanding, a quiet power that required no announcement. The tea grew lukewarm in the cup beside me, yet I did not disturb it, letting the passage of time mark the steady rhythm of my contemplation. Outside, the world moved with a casual indifference, unaware of the careful calculus unfolding within the walls of my home. I considered the days ahead, the opportunities to gather information, to protect the assets and memories that were mine, to navigate the subtleties of family dynamics with a clear mind. No raised voices, no confrontations, only a meticulous approach that would reveal truth and secure rightful claims without spectacle. My eyes traced the lines of sunlight on the floor, the shadows shifting as the day progressed, and in that quiet observation, I felt a profound sense of control, an assurance that patience and attentiveness could accomplish more than any immediate outburst. I did not need to act hastily. Every move would be calculated, every interaction considered, and the unfolding narrative would serve as its own revelation. As I stood to tidy the remaining cups and papers, I felt the steady pulse of resolve within me, a quiet determination that the path forward was mine to define, guided by intelligence, patience, and an unwavering sense of justice, all observed from the measured stillness of a woman who understood the value of calm before the inevitable resolution. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting long, soft shadows across the living room where I sat quietly, reviewing the stack of correspondence and documents that had accumulated since the funeral. Each envelope, each folded sheet of paper, was a fragment of a narrative carefully hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I moved methodically, placing one letter after another in chronological order, tracing the signatures, the dates, the notes in the margins, and the subtle indications of intention that Emily had left behind. Her attempts to obscure her involvement were evident in the small discrepancies, the rushed annotations, the incongruities that only someone patient and attentive could discern. James appeared briefly in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression guarded, and I noted the way he avoided making eye contact, the way his body language hinted at unease without any words being exchanged. I did not respond outwardly. I simply continued my quiet survey, my mind cataloging and connecting each detail, creating a mental map of intentions and timelines. The house was still, almost reverent in its calm, and I moved through the rooms as if walking through the chapters of a book, each space telling a story of past interactions and current calculations. The scent of polished wood and the faint aroma of the roses I had placed in the foyer mingled in the air, a reminder of the life and care I had invested in this home, now intersecting with the complexity of human ambition and deception. I paused at the window overlooking the garden, watching the light shift across the lawn, the shadows of the trees elongating with the passage of time, and I reflected on the subtleties of behavior I had observed. The way Emily had suggested certain arrangements with an air of casual concern, the way James had deferred in small, seemingly insignificant decisions, all converging into a pattern that was no longer subtle but unmistakable. I did not feel anger, only a focused clarity, a sense of strategy forming in the quiet stillness. Each observation was noted, each inconsistency recorded in the precise ledger of memory I maintained. The afternoon waned as I moved back to the study, carefully organizing the documents, highlighting details that would be crucial, not for confrontation, but for the assurance of rightful outcomes. I sipped my tea slowly, its warmth grounding me, and allowed the rhythm of my methodical work to establish a sense of measured control, a calm counterpoint to the undercurrent of tension that had entered the household unnoticed by most. Outside, the world continued with its ordinary pace, unaware of the meticulous attention and quiet vigilance unfolding within these walls. I moved to the bookshelf, selecting a volume of personal letters I had exchanged with my husband over decades, reading passages with a calm, reflective mind, each word reinforcing the principles of patience, observation, and deliberate action that had guided me to this point. The stack of documents beside me grew steadily organized, a tangible representation of the clarity and foresight I maintained, a buffer against the subtle manipulations that had been set in motion. I noted the precise ways in which time could be an ally, how waiting and watching could reveal truths that hasty reactions might obscure, and I allowed the quiet of the room, the measured pace of my actions, and the gentle progress of the day to serve as both preparation and testament to a strategy that would unfold with certainty. Each shadow, each beam of light, each sound in the distance contributed to a tapestry of awareness, reinforcing the notion that understanding and patience could navigate the most delicate of human dynamics. And I embraced that understanding fully, allowing it to shape the careful steps I would take in the hours and days ahead. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting slatted patterns across the polished hardwood floors, and I moved quietly through the living room, organizing the few personal effects I had gathered over the past days, each item a touchstone of memory and intention. The house was filled with a stillness that allowed every creak and whisper of the old walls to become amplified, each sound a subtle reminder of presence and absence. I settled at the kitchen table, spreading out the documents and letters I had been collecting, the inked lines of signatures and dates creating a map of careful planning and unspoken motives. Emily's name appeared repeatedly, in notes that seemed casual but were in fact deliberate, and I noted the precision of her hand, the way each request and suggestion was positioned to create pressure without overt confrontation. James had returned briefly, his conversation clipped and his movements brisk, as though the house itself had become an uncomfortable stage for behavior he had not rehearsed. I did not speak to him, did not acknowledge the tension he exuded. Instead, I focused on the materials before me, cataloging and analyzing with the steady patience that had always been my approach. The sun moved lower, shifting the patterns of light across the table, and I sipped from my cup of tea, noting the warmth against my palms as a grounding contrast to the intricate calculations of human behavior unfolding around me. I moved to the study, where the shelves of books had long served as both reference and reflection, and selected a small volume of personal notes and letters from my husband, reading passages slowly, deliberately, letting each sentence reaffirm the clarity and purpose that guided my next steps. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock, each measured sound a marker of time passing without haste, emphasizing the importance of deliberate action. I returned to the table, highlighting and annotating points of interest, every minor discrepancy a potential revelation, each small piece of evidence a thread connecting the patterns I had observed. I paused to look out the window at the garden, the late afternoon light catching the edges of the maple leaves, a gentle movement in contrast to the deliberate stillness of my mind, and considered how the smallest observation could guide future decisions. I did not feel anxiety or the need for immediate confrontation. My thoughts were structured, precise, and calm, allowing the sequence of events to unfold in a natural order that would reveal truth through patience rather than haste. I organized the envelopes by date and signature, aligning them with my mental notes, the careful attention to detail a silent assertion of presence and awareness, a quiet demonstration that I was fully engaged with the unfolding reality. As evening approached, the light shifted to a warm glow, and I allowed myself a slow, measured stretch, recognizing the continuity of my own actions and the intentionality behind each step. Every observation, every document, every subtle gesture that had been made around me was cataloged and integrated into a coherent strategy, and I felt a growing sense of assurance that the next interactions would be guided not by impulse, but by foresight. The house remained serene, almost expectant, and I moved to the window one final time before preparing for the evening, the clarity of mind and purpose in my actions serving as both shield and instrument, the quiet patience within me more potent than any overt display, ensuring that the careful path I had chosen would unfold with precision and with measured effectiveness. Evening descended slowly over the neighborhood, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn as I moved with deliberate calm through the rooms of my home, organizing and reviewing the documents and notes I had accumulated. The quiet was complete, punctuated only by the distant hum of cars along the street and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. I set the papers in neat stacks on the dining table, aligning each envelope and sheet by date and priority, each one a fragment of intention waiting to be understood and acted upon. Emily's previous suggestions and James' subtle evasions were no longer mere coincidences, but part of a larger pattern that I had come to recognize through careful observation. I sipped from my cup of tea, letting its warmth settle into my hands, grounding me in the present as I traced the connections across the pages before me. The light in the room dimmed gradually, shadows lengthening along the walls, and I allowed the passage of time to reinforce the deliberate pace I maintained, knowing that patience would reveal truths that haste might obscure. I moved to the study, pulling a few additional ledgers and letters from the shelf, cross-referencing details with the documents on the table, noting subtle discrepancies and patterns that spoke of planning and oversight, not accident. James appeared briefly in the hallway, his presence noted but unacknowledged, and Emily's absence allowed a temporary calm in which I could work without distraction, cataloging each observation and reinforcing my mental map of events. I did not react with anger or frustration. The power lay in awareness, in the careful accumulation of facts and understanding, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in the methodical progress I made. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, orange glow across the polished floors, and I allowed myself a moment to look out the window at the garden, observing the shadows of the trees shifting gently in the evening light, reflecting on how the quiet patience and observation I practiced would guide the steps I would take in the coming days. Every minor act, every subtle detail, every gesture and avoidance that I had recorded now fit into a coherent strategy that required no immediate confrontation but a measured response. I returned to the table, making notes and organizing evidence, considering how to protect what was mine while allowing the truth to unfold naturally through the careful navigation of behavior and documents. Each element of the home, each sound and sight, reinforced the importance of focus and deliberate action, and I moved through the evening with a steady hand and clear mind, confident that the patient approach I maintained would ensure that the intentions and manipulations around me would be revealed, addressed, and accounted for in a way that was both precise and controlled. As the night deepened, The house remained serene, every item in its place, every observation noted, and I felt the quiet strength of clarity and foresight, the calm assurance that careful attention to detail and measured steps would allow the situation to resolve in a manner consistent with justice, understanding, and strategic precision. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors, illuminating the subtle dust motes that drifted lazily in the air as I moved through the quiet house, organizing papers and reviewing the notes and correspondence I had gathered. I placed each document carefully on the dining table, arranging them in chronological order, connecting the lines of information, the discrepancies, and the subtle cues that revealed intention. Emily's name appeared frequently, often in conjunction with small suggestions or recommendations that now seemed purposeful, designed to influence or misdirect. James moved quietly through the house, his presence noted but acknowledged only with a calm glance. His nervous pacing and the occasional hesitation when I entered a room did not escape my attention. I sipped from a warm cup of tea, letting the taste and the heat settle into my hands as I considered each piece of evidence with deliberate care, noting where actions aligned or contradicted prior patterns. The air was filled with the faint scent of the roses I had placed in the foyer, their delicate fragrance mingling with the aroma of polished wood and the subtle notes of the tea, creating an environment conducive to focus and reflection. I returned to the study, reviewing letters and statements, tracing dates, times, and signatures, marking points of interest that would inform the strategy one had begun to formulate. Every gesture I had observed, every word overheard, every minor change in behavior was now a part of the tapestry I could see emerging, clear and coherent in its implications. The clock ticked steadily, a reminder of time passing, and I allowed each moment to reinforce the methodical pace I maintained, understanding that deliberate patience was a more powerful tool than immediate reaction. I moved through the rooms, aligning envelopes and notes, highlighting connections, and mentally rehearsing the next steps, knowing that precision and observation were as important as action itself. Outside, the neighborhood was calm, the early morning traffic and occasional chirping birds providing a gentle background rhythm, while inside, I cataloged every subtle movement, every fleeting expression, and every interaction I had witnessed, forming a comprehensive understanding of the dynamics at play. I considered the implications of each discovery, how to maintain control without confrontation, and how to ensure that the truth would be revealed in a way that was both effective and measured. I moved to the window, looking out over the garden, the maple leaves shifting slightly in the breeze, and reflected on the clarity of thought that patience and observation had granted me, a steady confidence in my ability to manage the situation with both subtlety and precision. I did not rush. I did not react impulsively. Instead, I focused on methodical, deliberate steps, understanding that careful preparation and a calm mind would allow the unfolding events to reveal themselves naturally, ensuring that every observation and every action taken would contribute to a resolution that was both just and controlled. The house remained quiet, the light shifting as the morning progressed, and I felt a steady, focused resolve, knowing that the careful accumulation of knowledge, the attentive observation of human behavior, and the measured execution of strategy would ensure that the coming days unfolded in a way that respected both justice and the subtle power of patient action. The morning light filtered softly through the tall windows, illuminating the study where I sat surrounded by the carefully organized documents and notes that had become the map of my understanding. Each envelope, each letter, each note contained details that revealed intentions, timelines, and subtle manipulations, and I moved through them methodically, tracing the paths that Emily and James had unwittingly revealed through their own actions. The air was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a marker of the deliberate pace I maintained, allowing the patterns to emerge clearly and without rush. I sipped my tea, feeling the warmth settle into my hands, grounding me as I reviewed the annotations I had made over the past several days, noting connections, discrepancies, and consistencies that painted a picture of calculated ambition. James appeared briefly in the hallway, his movements cautious, his eyes avoiding mine, and I noted the tension in his posture, cataloging it without comment, understanding that observation often carried more weight than confrontation. I moved to the dining room, spreading additional papers across the table, aligning them by date and significance, each adjustment reinforcing the sense of order and control I maintained over the unfolding situation. The subtle fragrance of fresh roses mingled with the aroma of brewed tea, creating an environment that was both serene and focused, a contrast to the undercurrent of tension that permeated the household. I reflected on the previous interactions, small gestures, and words that now carried meaning, and integrated them into the evolving understanding of the dynamics at play. Every hesitation, every seemingly minor suggestion, every indirect instruction from Emily had been cataloged and analyzed, forming a coherent strategy in my mind. The afternoon sun shifted across the polished floors, changing the light in the room, and I allowed the quiet passage of time to reinforce the patience and deliberation that guided my actions. I revisited the letters from my husband, reading passages that reminded me of the principles of clarity, integrity, and measured response, using them as both inspiration and confirmation for the path I had chosen. I did not feel urgency. The strength lay in awareness and preparation, in the calm assessment of the situation and the deliberate accumulation of evidence and understanding. The house remained still, each object in its place, each sound noted, each observation added to the tapestry of knowledge I had created. I considered the next steps with clarity, knowing that careful, measured action would be more effective than any hasty response, and I allowed the quiet strength of patience to guide my planning. Shadows lengthened across the walls as the day progressed, and I felt the steady assurance that my deliberate, observant approach would allow the truth to emerge naturally, that the intentions and manipulations I had witnessed would be revealed through precision, insight, and the patient unfolding of carefully considered steps, ensuring that every action I took would be purposeful, effective, and measured in its impact, securing both clarity and justice without spectacle. As the afternoon waned into early evening, the sunlight softened to a warm, golden hue that streamed through the tall windows, casting long patterns across the polished hardwood floors of my home. I moved quietly from room to room, gathering the notes, letters, and documents that I had been meticulously organizing over the past days, each one a piece of the puzzle that would reveal the true nature of recent events. Emily's attempts at subtle influence and James' cautious evasions were now fully visible to me, their intentions clear when examined in the context of the broader patterns I had observed. I laid out the materials carefully on the dining table, arranging them in chronological order and connecting threads across different dates and communications, tracing the lines of planning and suggestion that had been designed to manipulate or control outcomes. I paused occasionally to sip from a warm cup of tea, the steam rising gently into the air, its warmth grounding me as I reviewed the details with careful attention, noting the smallest of discrepancies that hinted at the true scope of their efforts. The house was still, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors, each noise accentuating the quiet focus that filled the space. I considered the interactions of the past week, the glances, gestures, and subtle words exchanged, integrating each observation into a coherent understanding of the strategy at work. Every minor act, every suggestion framed as casual concern, every avoidance or hesitancy became a data point in the careful analysis I maintained. I walked to the study, selecting additional documents and letters from the shelves, cross-referencing them with those on the table, highlighting patterns and inconsistencies, and noting the precise ways in which timing and context amplified their significance. The garden outside reflected the shifting light, the maple leaves moving gently in the breeze, a calming counterpoint to the calculated observation I maintained indoors. I felt no urgency or frustration. The strength lay in methodical patience, in the quiet accumulation of evidence, and in the deliberate consideration of the next steps to be taken. The sun lowered further, bathing the room in a soft amber glow, and I allowed myself a slow, deep breath, appreciating the clarity that careful attention and careful planning had brought me. Each item on the table, each annotation, each subtle detail of behavior observed over time now contributed to a comprehensive strategy that would allow the truth to emerge naturally and effectively. I moved from the dining room to the living room, arranging letters and documents in neat piles, reviewing notes, and ensuring that everything was organized for review and reference. The serenity of the house, the faint aroma of tea and polished wood, and the warmth of the late afternoon combined to create an environment of calm focus, ideal for the precise work of analysis and preparation. I reflected on the past days, the patience and care with which I had observed and cataloged every interaction, understanding that the resolution of these events would come not from haste or overt confrontation, but from careful, deliberate action guided by knowledge, foresight, and a clear understanding of intentions. As the evening approached, the light fading softly, I felt the steady assurance that my measured, observant approach would ensure that the unfolding events would reveal the truth in a manner both just and precise, that each interaction would be guided by awareness and clarity, and that the culmination of these efforts would allow for a resolution grounded in insight, patience, and deliberate, effective action. The evening had settled fully over the house, the soft glow of the lamps casting a gentle warmth across the rooms as I moved with deliberate calm, gathering the documents and notes I had been organizing all week. Each envelope, each letter, each annotation was now part of a complete map, a careful record of actions, words, and intentions that had once been subtle but were now unmistakably clear. Emily and James had unknowingly left a trail through their small gestures, their hurried notes, and their indirect communications, and I reviewed each one carefully, noting patterns and connections that revealed the broader story. I moved to the dining table, spreading the papers in neat, chronological order, highlighting discrepancies and aligning evidence, creating a visual representation of the strategy and intent that had been quietly unfolding around me. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floors, each sound emphasizing the stillness and focus that filled the space. I sipped from my warm cup of tea, letting the heat settle into my hands as I contemplated the sequence of events, the motivations that had driven certain behaviors, and the precise way in which observation and patience could guide the resolution. The light outside shifted subtly, the last traces of daylight fading and leaving the garden bathed in twilight, and I took a moment to look out the window, the moving shadows of the trees reflecting the gentle passage of time as the day drew to a close. Each interaction I had witnessed, each subtle word and gesture, had been cataloged in my mind, every detail contributing to a coherent understanding of the actions and intentions of those around me. I did not rush, I did not react impulsively. Instead, I allowed clarity and deliberate planning to guide me, ensuring that every decision and action would be grounded in insight and precision. I walked slowly through the rooms, adjusting and reviewing, confirming the organization of every piece of information, the alignment of each document, and the completeness of the observations I had recorded. The quiet focus of the house, the subtle interplay of light and shadow, and the meticulous arrangement of notes and letters all reinforced a sense of control and preparedness, a quiet confidence that came from understanding and foresight. I considered the next steps carefully, aware that patience and strategic observation were more powerful than any immediate confrontation, and I felt a steady assurance that the unfolding events would reveal the truth in a clear, deliberate manner. As I returned to the study one last time for the evening, I reflected on the calm that patience had brought, the clarity that careful attention and thoughtful observation had provided, and the quiet strength that came from knowing that actions taken with precision and awareness would ensure that the story, the evidence, and the rightful outcome would all align naturally. The house remained serene, the air still and focused, and I allowed the steady rhythm of careful preparation and mindful observation to fill the space, confident that the culmination of these efforts would bring clarity, resolution, and a sense of measured justice, all achieved through deliberate, thoughtful, and patient action.